Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. Amber, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
So you're here on a Wednesday. That's not normal.
That's
Tell us
right.
What's going on?
So I'm traveling this weekend. I'm going to Colorado Springs for a conference that I can't tell you about. So
do you know that I have a home in Denver? I know it's not that close. It's about 45 minutes.
We definitely have to talk about this more after the show then. But yes, I will be out Friday. Robbie's actually going to be here. So we're just swapping days, covering each other. And we'll have the same arrangement next week as well.
Look, that's what friends are for, right?
That's right.
We're talking about a lot on the show. So coming up on Rising, why don't you tell us and get us started?
Absolutely, will do. So we will discuss how a White House memo says that furloughed federal workers are not necessarily entitled to back pay. And Democratic lawmakers aren't too happy about it.
Plus, people from both sides of the aisle are warning President Trump not to pardon former Epstein accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell.
And Attorney General Pam Bondi had a fiery day on Capitol Hill, getting into multiple heated arguments over a range of topics like the Epstein files and Trump's deployment of troops to American cities.
I think with all the news, there's so much going on, and you're seeing like a lot of, like this week with the shutdown, with, seeing everything happening in Congress. It's like no action, but a lot of action at the same time. Is it like one of those weeks that feels like it's only Wednesday, but it's still, oh my gosh, it's only Wednesday?
I feel that way too. And people always ask me if work is slower when there's a government shutdown. And I'm like, actually, it's kind of the opposite because we're covering all of the angles and the negotiations that are taking place.
And are you watching specifically, like as somebody who's worked in politics, or both of us for all this time, are you watching exactly what people are doing during this time? Like how they tweet, how they show up at Capitol Hill? Like, is that something that's on your mind?
Yeah, trying to. I'm trying to just see if there's any movement in terms of negotiations. I know one of the things we might get into later is that Trump is considering getting those Obamacare subsidies extended. So, but first, Lindsey, I want to know what's in your lens.
A little bit of that. So we're going to talk about that. So this week, Congress is still locked in a standoff that's about to hit millions of Americans right in the wallet. So the government shutdown continues, and one of the biggest casualties could be health care. So if lawmakers don't extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies put in place during COVID, health insurance premiums for more than 20 million people could double. But instead of offering real solutions, we're seeing memes sometimes and tantrums. So Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene went off on her own party, writing, quote, "I'm absolutely disgusted that health insurance premiums will double if the tax credits expire this year. Also, I think health insurance and all insurance is a scam, just to be clear." Not a single Republican in leadership talked to us about this or has given us a plan to help Americans deal with their insurance premiums doubling. That's Marjorie Taylor Greene to her own party. Now, let's be honest. This trend of MTG calling out Republican leadership is pointing to a bigger problem. What we're seeing is a slow breakup between the GOP and some of the loudest voices that actually helped MAGA build its brand. As a recent Rolling Stone article points out, the so-called manosphere influencers who boosted Trump in 2024 are now cooling on him. 9 months into his agenda, they're realizing the slogans don't really match the policies. For example, Kick streamer Aiden Ross told his audience, quote, "Can I tell you guys something? Now that I look back on it, I really, really wish I never got into politics." Comedian Theo Von, who once gave Trump a friendly platform during the campaign, found out the Department of Homeland Security used his footage in a deportation promo video recently. He clapped back pretty fast, writing on X, quote, "Yo, DHS, I didn't approve to be used in this. I know you know my address, so send a check. And please take this down and please keep me out of your banger deportation videos." Then he doubled down and said this.
My father immigrated here from Nicaragua, right? Like one of my prized possessions is I have his immigration papers when he came here. And I have them in a frame. This was just right? It was
And he's not alone. Earlier this summer, even Joe Rogan, one of the most influential podcasters in the country, slammed Trump's immigration approach.
This is my feeling. Like if you got here and you've integrated into our society, yeah, maybe you shouldn't have snuck in, but you did it and you're not breaking any laws. You're a hardworking person. Those people need a path to citizenship, man. Because if you don't, then they're just preyed upon.
He went on to say this.
Like gang members, yes. Criminals, yes. This, why? Why?
And then there's comedian Andrew Schultz, who voted for Trump in 2024, saying this earlier this summer.
I voted for none of this. He's doing the exact opposite of everything I voted for. Yeah. I want him to stop the wars. He's funding them. I want him to shrink spending, reduce the budget. He's increasing it. It's like everything that he said he's going to do, except sending immigrants back.
When your most loyal messengers start fact-checking you in real time, that's not just dissent, that's disillusionment. So whether it's over Epstein or the deficit or immigration or now, like MTG said, skyrocketing healthcare costs, Trump and Republican leadership are running out of mirrors to point fingers at. Because sooner or later, the base always realizes what the rest of America already knows. Slogans don't solve problems, but policies do.
All right, so let's start with...
There's so much to unpack.
I know.
Okay.
I want to start with the healthcare fight because
Okay.
I do think it's interesting that a lot of people perhaps don't realize that the subsidies we're talking about were ones that were implemented during the COVID pandemic to help people make up for the fact that so many were out of work or furloughed, et cetera. And so it's really just going back to pre-2020 levels. And there was a poll that came out earlier this year from a healthcare think tank that asked people, would you support returning to those pre-COVID healthcare levels and getting rid of those subsidies? And when it was asked in a nonpartisan way, the majority of Americans supported that. So I actually think Republicans do have a case to make here for not extending the subsidies, but they haven't really been explaining that this is just the pandemic subsidy that's going away.
I will say that I agree because as I read more into the policy here, I was kind of looking and saying, okay, there's one Obamacare that got pushed through that people had a variety of feelings about. And then there were changes that happened during the pandemic. And now Marjorie Taylor Greene's whole point, which was a very long comment that she made on social media, was very much like, I didn't want Obamacare, but because I had it, now these are our premiums. Now they're without the subsidies, they're doubling. So it's very convoluted. But I think the main thing is that day-to-day people who aren't in the weeds of politics as much as you and I are going to see a cost rise, and that'll be alarming, whether it was from COVID or whether it was from Obamacare or whether it was, whatever the incidents. And when they see Congress kind of arguing about whether or not they're going to do something about it, that's frustrating. And even senators like Josh Hawley has said, we can't leave people hanging.
Yeah, no, I think it's true that when people see a cost increase, it doesn't necessarily matter why that's happening, but I do think that there's additional messaging and framing that Republicans could be doing that could make that pain less politically damaging in the way that Democrats are sort of framing the entire thing. Well, this is about healthcare. Well, it's like a little bit more complicated and specific than that, right? But let's get into the podcasters who have been talking about the Trump administration. I found it interesting that not all of them agreed on the reasons why they're dissatisfied with the Trump administration. You had Theo Von and Joe Rogan who don't like the mass deportations. They want it targeted based on violent criminals. Yeah. But then Andrew Schultz said, that's actually the only thing he's doing that I support is sending people back. I'm more concerned about the foreign policy. What do you make of the fact that there's this split among what parts of Trump's agenda the young podcast base is excited about?
Well, the interesting thing to me is that President Trump is an anomaly in a way that he does whatever he wants. He's not a traditional conservative by any means that I've studied. He kind of goes with whatever he thinks is the best policy. And so podcasters are this voice that kind of are unique and able to sway however they feel inclined. But I think when there's been so many issues where people have been so vocal, and I know they're vocal on different things, like condemning or disagreeing with him, how does that shape what the messaging is of the party or MAGA? It seems a little bit all over the place from my purview, looking at everybody debating. And I know part of it is open debate, but at the same time, then what's the strategy?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say on people like Joe Rogan and Theo Von and even Andrew Schultz is that they are also not traditional partisans either. And I think sometimes people conflated interviewing Trump or giving Trump or J.D. Vance a platform as implicit support of all of the policies. And so I do think it's kind of unfair for them to try to map the MAGA agenda directly onto their politics.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about this a lot more.
As the government shutdown continues, lawmakers in the White House are discussing back pay for furloughed workers. We'll take a look at President Trump's comments when we come back. It's officially day 8 of the government shutdown, and now lawmakers appear to be at odds when it comes to federal workers receiving back pay once the shutdown is over. A memo obtained by The Hill from the White House's Office of Budget and Management suggests that furloughed workers are not necessarily guaranteed back pay from their time off.
Now, the debate centers around the Government Employee Fair Treatment Act of 2019, which President Trump signed during the last government shutdown. The White House is now pushing its own interpretation of that law. Here's what Trump had to say when asked if it was the White House's position that furloughed workers should receive their back pay.
I would say it depends on who we're talking about. I can tell you this, the Democrats have put a lot of people in great risk and jeopardy, but it really depends on who you're talking about. But for the most part, we're going to take care of our people. There are some people that really don't deserve to be taken care of, and we'll take care of them in a different way.
It remains to be seen how exactly the Trump administration would go about this proposal, but any attempts to withhold back pay from furloughed workers would likely face legal actions from unions. Lawmakers on the left quickly objected to Trump's comments in the White House memo, like Texas Representative Jasmine Crockett, writing on X, quote, "Let me be clear. It's illegal to deny federal workers back pay after a shutdown. There's a 2019 law that guarantees it, but Trump is once again trying to break the law. You don't get to punish people for doing their jobs just because you're failing at yours."
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson took a more neutral stance, saying that the biggest priority right now should just be getting the government open again.
We don't want this to happen. The key point, the important point to remember here is this can stop right now. They'll get another opportunity to change course and open the government. And then we'll have all these policy debates, as we always do.
Meanwhile, the issue of mass firings in the government continues to come up. President Trump says that time is ticking to keep more layoffs from happening.
How many permanent jobs are you talking about to be eliminated?
Well, I can tell you, I'll be able to tell you that in 4 or 5 days if this keeps going on. If this keeps going on, it'll be substantial, and a lot of those jobs will never come back. But you're going to have a lot closer to a balanced budget.
Something about the idea of using like American workers as a pawn in this obvious contentious moment between Democrats and Republicans doesn't sit well with me, specifically when administration officials told the Washington Post that the goal of the memo and sending it out and kind of even becoming public was to maximize, that's a quote, Republicans' leverage in the shutdown. And so there's people that are really, showing up honorably to work temporarily for free while they get paid on the back end, that have families that are dealing with a tight economy, that are still, even no matter how much it might have cooled down, dealing with inflation and rising prices around the country, and people who work for the government here but also are back and forth. And I think that we just have to be mindful that there's real people involved here that are watching this every day and uncertain, like the rest of the country, about what tomorrow looks like.
Yeah, I think that's true to an extent. So when it comes to the federal government, I think one thing that I don't like to see is the federal government being used as a jobs program. And we obviously have a lot of fat in the federal government that deserves to be cut. And doing a reduction in force during a government shutdown is something that the OMB director has the ability to do. And if that's a way to get rid of individuals who either are not performing well, who are actively sabotaging the president's agenda, or really just aren't needed, I think that makes sense. In terms of the back pay for furloughed workers, I actually would take probably a middle ground on this. I mean, if you're not working, then I think it's understandable why people feel icky about them getting full pay. But I also recognize that the shutdown's not their fault. It's the fault of Congress for not passing a spending bill. So maybe we could meet in the middle and say that they get a certain percentage of their normal paycheck while they're off work.
And I think it's interesting to watch the House Speaker and Senator Thune. They've been vocal even yesterday, like, oh no, we fully expect people will get paid. I think they're watching their tone on this as the American public watches what they say and sees how much they may or may not be involved in this political back and forth. But I also saw an interesting poll from Harvard that came out that 70% of people completely Americans oppose the shutdown. So obviously, and that's my stance too. I think that the government shutting down is just a failure to lead. So I wish that they would solve it. But 53% in that poll are blaming Republicans. It's not that much better for Democrats. It's 47% for Democrats. But at the same time, it's not the win or the home run that generally is the side that's holding up the conversation and wants something added to a spending bill, which generally it's like, okay, it's going to fall on your party as the people to blame. This poll is looking like it actually is still falling on Republicans. And maybe because health insurance and health care is so important to people at this moment, now that it's been brought to their attention, whether they like it or not, I think a conversation would be warranted in order to get people back to work and also make people feel like they're not going to also get back to work and have no money because they'll be paying all of it for health insurance into the holiday or past the holiday season before this expires.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think this is a classic Republican messaging problem. When they're on offense, they don't know how to frame the conversation to get people on their side. And in pretty much every shutdown, they've ended up on the losing side of the PR war because they just don't know how to talk about their policies in a way that resonates with American voters. Trump is really one of the few people in the Republican Party who's actually good at that. And in this case, I think it would be easy for them to say, like, we offered a continuing resolution that was the same spending levels that we passed earlier this spring, which is precisely what Democrats called for in the past year, right? Which is they wanted a simple CR. But now we have a simple CR on the table and Democrats are demanding an additional $1 trillion in spending. Like, that should be really obvious and simple. And I hear some Republicans making that point, but not in a succinct, very direct manner. They're kind of skirting around the issue, and that obviously creates a problem for them politically.
And I think looking at the Democratic Party right now, where it stands, it's almost like, what does the Democratic Party have to lose by taking this toe-to-toe into the end? I think the longest shutdown was more than 30 days, so taking this as far as that one. Because they're looking at just having lost an election with Kamala losing, and then also having no control, really, or overwhelming control in the House or the Senate. They're looking at trying to restructure what the brand of the Democratic Party even is, as we have people like Mamdani that people won't even support, but then you have people who are trying to play the middle and get rid of the woke ideologies completely. Like, I think there's a little bit of what the messaging problem would be. There's a communication about that. And so what I know that they know is that healthcare has been a positive issue for them. Most polling shows that people just think they're on the right side when it comes to healthcare. And so if they know that this is a winning issue, plus they understand that Americans deeply do care, take politics out of it, about making sure they're covered for healthcare, then it's like now or never, because, you know, what would make them have the incentive to believe that Republicans would actually have a conversation, a real conversation that implements policy about healthcare after this? Like, we're getting to the end of the year. I think that you would agree that it may or may not happen. There's no guarantee that Republicans are actually going to take up a conversation about passing some new healthcare policy.
Oh yeah, Republicans have been out to lunch on healthcare for 10 years. I mean, that's nothing
So
new.
that's kind of like why they have to hold their ground right now.
And I think the only thing they have working in their favor is the fact that the Democrats, that is, want to, again, re-implement this, or extend rather, a COVID-era subsidy when the pandemic is long over. And they also want to continue federal reimbursements for states that provide Medicaid funding for illegal immigrants. Like, those are their two strongest talking points on healthcare. But it's true, they haven't provided a comprehensive solution to actually fixing our healthcare problem. And even when they had the opportunity to repeal Obamacare through a skinny repeal, they had, obviously, infamous Senator John McCain giving the thumbs down.
Yeah, so we're going to keep talking about this until the government opens up. But in the meantime, President Trump was recently asked about looking into a pardon for convicted sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell, and his response wasn't as definitive as some had hoped. Don't go anywhere. Earlier this week, President Trump raised some eyebrows when he suggested that issuing a pardon for convicted sex offender Ghislaine Maxwell is not out of the question. Maxwell is serving a 20-year prison sentence for her alleged involvement with Jeffrey Epstein.
On Monday, the Supreme Court declined to consider Maxwell's appeal of her conviction. When asked about possibly giving her a pardon, here's what the president said.
You know, I haven't heard the name in so long. I can say this, that I'd have to take a look at it. I would have to take a look. Did they reject that?
She wanted to appeal her conviction.
And what happened?
They said that they were not going to hear her appeal.
I see. Well, I'll take a look at it. I will speak to the DOJ.
Those comments drew some strong reactions from both sides of the political aisle. Liberal commentator Brian Krasenstein writes on X, quote, "Let's be absolutely clear. No president even entertains a pardon for a convicted sex trafficker like Maxwell unless there's something they don't want the world to find out."
And right-wing activist Laura Loomer strongly condemned the idea of pardoning Maxwell. She says, "I strongly advise against anyone lobbying the Trump admin and the DOJ to pardon Ghislaine Maxwell. Do not do it. I repeat, do not do it. There will be no coming back from that. I repeat again, for the love of God, do not do it."
I think this is the one thing that a lot of people agree upon. And it's not even like whether or not we're looking into the Maxwell, into Epstein and saying release the files for political reasons or all that stuff. This is just like a blanket do not do it. I rarely agree with Laura Loomer, but like, what the heck? This is not, I don't know who this serves.
To me, this is not worth the potential of getting more information about Epstein and his clients. Like, there's obviously a trade-off to be made here, and I don't think the trade-off here is worth it, of granting Ghislaine Maxwell her freedom in exchange for that information, which likely, I mean, maybe she would tell you something new, but they already had that 3-hour conversation between her and Todd Blanche where she was later moved to this more minimum security prison. Like, what else is she possibly holding back that would justify a pardon? It just doesn't make sense to me. I will say I think this is fair, which is that there was not nearly as much outrage when President Joe Biden had pardoned convicted murderers and rapists. And so it does feel like a little bit of a double standard to me that people are coming out so hard against something that the president hasn't even said that he's doing.
Well, I think the entertaining part of it, and also, well, first of all, Ghislaine Maxwell has perjured, right? So I don't know that I would take anything that she says, even
not
if she
a trustworthy person.
Yeah, not trustworthy. So we just start there. But secondly, I think the high-profile nature of everything Epstein now that the entire world is watching, from the Cash Patel Bondi days of we have this binder to right now, I mean, the whole country at the very least is wrapped up in what are the next steps. Some people believe there's nothing else to be seen here. Some people just believe, okay, these are convicted sex offenders, children are involved, this could get really uncomfortable, and no parent, nobody watching in America thinks that their actions are appropriate, alleged actions they're convicted of. So I think there's so much wrapped up here that when you decide who to pardon and the world knows about it, right? Because Biden did go through his Rolodex and decide who he wants to pardon. But when we're looking at this case and knowing the high profile nature of it and how many people are invested with the very top line of it, sex offenders pardoning, that will never sit well with the American public, especially at the same time that people are questioning, are there more information? And is there more information in the Treasury Department? Are there documents that will change something? And a lot of people's answers to that has been a strong no. But while that's not crystal clear to the American public, pardoning her just seems like a disaster.
Yeah, and I will say, in regards to what the president said in response to that question, I have never in my life heard a reporter ask Trump if he's going to do something, and he says, no, I'm not doing that. It's always, we're going to look into it, or, I don't know, we'll have to see. The man doesn't like to rule anything out, but if you had to ask me if he's going to pardon Ghislaine, I'd eat my hat if he did that.
But you know what I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think somebody had asked him about Derek Chauvin, and it was pretty firm, like, I'm not looking into that. Like, he said he didn't say no. He said, I think he said, I'm not looking into that. And that was pretty clear.
Yeah, I think in that case, it was because it was already being discussed behind the scenes in the DOJ. And so in this case, this is like something new on his radar. And he's like, I don't know.
Yeah, why would I lock myself into anything? So Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker drawing some stark comparisons between the Trump administration's actions and 1930s Germany. Stick around.
What we're talking about is authoritarianism. We could have talked about Pol Pot. We could have talked about authoritarians across history. I chose something I know very well. I helped to build a Holocaust museum. And what I know is in the early days of the Nazi regime, they started slowly but surely taking away people's rights. And what we're seeing now is the very same thing.
Strong language from Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker there. He was speaking on the deployment of ICE and federal law enforcement to Chicago and the threats Trump has made to send National Guard troops to the city as part of his crackdown on crime. Here's a little more of what Pritzker had to say.
They've gone into cities now with the military. Think about that. In your lifetime, have you ever seen anything like that, where the President of the United States is sending military or troops dressed as military, ICE and CBP, in camouflage with automatic weapons into our major cities? It's wrong. And indeed, especially at a time when it's the President of the United States who's causing the mayhem on the ground. He's the one taking funding away from law enforcement, taking funding away from victims, taking money away from community violence intervention. I mean, who is it here that's standing up for the rights of our people?
Yesterday, during a Senate committee hearing, Attorney General Pam Bondi indicated that troops are already on their way to Chicago. We'll get to her testimony later in this show, but meantime, President Trump says he wouldn't rule out invoking the Insurrection Act to deploy more troops to U.S. cities and allow them to directly arrest people.
Well, it's been invoked before, as you know. If you look at Chicago, Chicago's a great city where there's a lot of crime. And if the governor can't do the job, we'll do the job. It's all very simple. They probably had 50 murders in Chicago over the last 5, 6, 7 months. Many people were shot. And then the governor gets up and he says, well, we can handle it. They can't handle it. They don't know what they're doing. The mayor is grossly incompetent.
That law has not been invoked since 1992 during the LA riots. I want to start with what J.B. Pritzker said, because I think he ought to be ashamed of himself. I mean, we have a moment after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. There was a man arrested over the weekend with 200 handmade explosives outside of a red mass for SCOTUS justices who had expressed anti-ICE, anti-SCOTUS things in his writings that he gave to police. We had Jay Jones texting people in 2022 fantasizing about the murder of his political opponent, and the Kavanaugh assassin appearing in court and getting a light sentence because of his transgender identity, when attempted assassins would typically get 30 years or even life in prison. And Democrats have been saying that we need to tone down the rhetoric, and yet here's J.B. Pritzker likening the Trump administration to Nazis. It's disgusting.
Yeah, I actually agree. I think that the overuse of likening or using the word fascist and using Gestapo administration, likening people to Nazis, I think it's been abused and disgustingly overused over the last few years, so much that it's almost like a punchline. And then there are Jewish people all over the country that are kind of like, I can't imagine if everything was likened to slavery. You know, as a black person in this country, that would be extremely upsetting. So we constantly use that term and everything is so dramatic when really a conversation is just needed. And perhaps you do think Trump is going too far, but I don't think that we're going to turn into Nazi Germany. I don't think this is the worst of times. We talked about that on Friday, right? And so, you know, I think with that said and that put aside, that I completely condemn constantly comparing those things. The overwhelming abuse of power here when it comes to looking at local cities, particularly when it comes to crime, because I know Robbie and I and you and I always talk about how that immigration is a federal issue. So when we're talking about crime, we've even had Megyn Kelly say, I don't think it's appropriate. I never agree, she said, with J.B. Pritzker, but President Trump sending troops in or a National Guard to deal with crime is not the solution. And I also agree that over militarizing our cities is not the way to solve crime. I also agree that, like D.C., Chicago certainly can use assistance in figuring out how to bring crime down in every city. My first concern was that we started with D.C., which I know is an anomaly when it comes down to how to deal with locations because they have a different relationship with the federal government. But I think when he just nitpicked other places, like didn't start with Memphis, which, you know, or other places in Tennessee that have some of the biggest crime places, and automatically went to Chicago, pinpointed Baltimore or Detroit, it just kind of felt random based on Democratic leaderships. And I think that the conversation should happen with where is the most crime? Where is the quote unquote national emergency that would warrant national troops going in? And then where is the conversation with local government, mayors, governors, and saying, how do we solve this? Because I've heard governors and mayors of many cities say, yes, even right here in D.C., Mayor Bowser saying we could use more funding for our police force. We certainly could use help in these areas. But I think when you just kind of strong arm and make a decision as the president versus having a dialogue with this leadership to figure out long-term solutions, not only do you put a Band-Aid on a crime problem that will just come back because people maybe are fearful that they see armed uniforms in the streets more often, but when you go away, what happens? And the long-term solution is not to have our National Guard sitting in local cities across America. That's not going to be the way that anyone wants to live.
So Trump has talked about sending the National Guard into blue cities and red states like Memphis and St. Louis, and those governors obviously are willing to work with him on that plan. Chicago, to me, is a little bit of a different animal because in the past week, we have seen the deliberate impeding of federal immigration officers by protesters and rioters in the city, including several people who have rammed or blocked in ICE vehicles. We saw hundreds of people surrounding ICE vehicles as they were trying to take detainees away from certain areas. And so if you are impeding federal law enforcement, then you don't have a states' rights argument anymore because they have to be free to carry out those duties. And if they're not, then I think the president absolutely has the legal authority to send in the National Guard to make sure that those riots are suppressed.
We certainly don't need community vigilantes. I get it. People think they're doing the right thing or maybe trying to say this is not the right cause, but anytime you're going against law enforcement as a civilian is a disaster, right? That they have they're actually trained to protect themselves. And so I don't think that that's going to be a good solution either. But I know that the temperature and the climate is heightened for some people in that community relationship element because of the presence of ICE in these communities. And ICE, the people working for ICE are not in the wrong. They're doing their job, right? They've been sent there by the federal government. But the friction is there that people are just like, Like, I know that there was a report about parents who were picking up their children and saw ICE like somewhere in the vicinity. And so they kind of made a blockade to make sure that the kids just get directly on the bus or to their parents' cars, because they're not trying to impede ICE. They just also don't want to create an environment of fear for young kids. You're taking away their innocence in certain ways. And so people are collateral damage of this. Not everybody that's Latino or who may look or sound or feel like a migrant is. They're migrants from all different races. And I think that the idea that people are on alert in these cities and there's a more succinct way to handle this is some of the argument coming from the Democratic side that this is not the way forward. Well, maybe we can if you want to make immigration a policy, let's go through Congress and put a policy in place about how we're going to work this out throughout the country. But just strong arming and sending the military in is not the way forward.
Well, the problem with going through Congress is that inevitably there's always these immigration reform bills that don't require deportations on a mass level before they allow amnesty or a certain number of border crossings, like we saw with the so-called bipartisan border bill during the Biden administration. And so I think Republicans are just done with that. Like, they feel like they've been sold up a river every time that they do a comprehensive immigration reform bill. It always leads to amnesty. And I also think Democrats lose the argument when they say, well, we want this to be done in a more discreet manner that doesn't bring fear to communities, when they are deliberately not cooperating with ICE. If they were cooperating, then their local police could keep people detained and held for ICE to come pick them up at jails. But because they're not doing that, ICE has no choice but to go into the community and actually round people up themselves.
But the large majority of migrants aren't even criminals. And so when we're talking about going into these cities, we're getting rid of farmers, which Republicans and people who voted for Trump have complained about in Pennsylvania and Los Angeles and throughout California. Like, we're taking people who were just civilians and working, which Joe Rogan was bringing up in an earlier segment. People are actually being in fear of their life. Is that the environment that we want to create for people that are helping our economy? In many ways, and many could argue, it's like there are big businesses that rely, even President Trump's businesses in the past have relied on immigrant labor. And so I know there are two schools of thoughts. Get every single immigrant out of this country that came here illegally. Me. Okay, you're that. And then there's other school of thought of like Robbie's school of thought is very much like, let's get the criminals out of here. And everybody agrees on the criminal piece, but everyone doesn't agree on the other piece. So why are we pressing forward with that agenda when the whole country?
Well, it was what he promised on the campaign trail was mass deportations. They said they were going to prioritize the criminals, but that was never an indication that they weren't going to deport other people as well.
This is going to keep happening, I know, so we'll be talking about it.
We will. Attorney General Pam Bondi testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday. We'll have more on the combative hearing coming up next. Stay with us.
Despite the government shutdown, Attorney General Pam Bondi was up on Capitol Hill Tuesday to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And it was just as contentious as it was expected to be.
This marked Bondi's first appearance before a congressional oversight hearing. She received questions on everything from Trump's deployment of troops to U.S. cities, to the Epstein files, to the previous administration's acquisition of phone records belonging to 9 Republican members of Congress during the January 6th investigation. And her strategy throughout all of it seemed to be punch back early and often.
Senator Blumenthal, I cannot believe that you would accuse me of impropriety. How dare you? I'm a career prosecutor. Don't you ever challenge my integrity. Senator Whitehouse, you sit here and make salacious remarks, once again trying to slander President Trump left and right. I don't know the answer, Senator.
Yet you do know the answer to that.
Don't call me a liar.
I didn't call you a liar.
You just said I know the answer. I said I don't know the answer.
Bondi made so many personal attacks on senators that Vermont Senator Peter Welch began his time by cracking a joke about it. Of course, top of mind for Democrats was the deployment of troops to American cities like Chicago and Portland, something the ranking member of the committee, Illinois Senator Dick Durbin, focused on during his time.
They are going to transfer Texas National Guard units to the state of Illinois. What's the rationale for that?
Yeah, Chairman, as you shut down the government, you voted to shut down the government, and you're sitting here, our law enforcement officers aren't being paid. They're out there working to protect you. I wish you loved Chicago as much as you hate President Trump. And currently, the National Guard are on the way to Chicago. If you're not going to protect your citizens, President Trump will. The National Guard is on the way right now as we speak. Oh, by the way, so is Director Patel and Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. You're sitting here grilling me, and they're on their way to Chicago to keep your state safe.
Madam Attorney General, it's my job to grill you.
Sparks also flew when senators repeatedly asked Bondi about the investigation into Tom Homan, allegedly taking a $50,000 bribe. Here's her response to Senator Adam Schiff.
Did he take the money?
Senator Schiff, I answered that question multiple times. And frankly, you know.
Well, I don't think, with respect, I don't think you did. But in case I just didn't hear you, what is the answer? Did he take the money?
Senator Schiff, that happened prior to my confirmation as Attorney General.
Do you know?
I said that. You know, Senator Schiff, if you worked for me, you would have been fired because you were censured by Congress for lying with your
We can stipulate to, you can stipulate to all your personal attacks on the Democratic members of the committee.
Personal attacks. You've been attacking my FBI director. You've been attacking my office. You've been attacking.
But we're interested in.
Your borders are.
As for Republicans, many were deeply concerned about former Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's investigation into Republican lawmakers as part of his January 6 investigation. Senators Hawley and Blackburn, who were both on the Arctic Frost list, had questions for Bondi about the investigation.
I've heard them say that Joe Biden never targeted his political enemies. Joe Biden never directed his attorney general to target his political opponents. That's interesting. Because I could have sworn that yesterday we learned that the FBI tapped my phone, tapped Lindsey Graham's phone, tapped Marsha Blackburn's phone, tapped 5 other phones of United States senators. Gee, it sure looks like targeting political opponents to me. You're going to do a thorough investigation into this, I trust. Is that correct?
We will be looking at all aspects of this, and I have talked to Director Patel at length.
Wow.
Fiery.
Yeah. So I think first I'm gonna say this. She watched RFK's hearing at Capitol Hill. She probably watched Kash Patel and was like, oh no, I'm ready for y'all. And she was ready, okay? No matter where you fall in the aisle, when a woman is in a hot seat like that and just throwing stuff back, I'm not gonna lie. I definitely, we can go through the details, but just seeing her that fiery, it kind of made my heart smile. But honestly, I think that the tactic of it all, like even though she had them remarks and was pushing back, the deflect. There were real conversations being had, right, about the National Guard being in places where Democrats didn't think they should be, about Epstein, about so much. And she just, I'm fine with the personal attacks, right? You're defending yourself against what you felt like was an ambush, but answer some of the questions, right? Like get into it. I don't think that the American public, like they want anything from that. And a lot of times with these things, they don't, right? They end up the losers in this because people want a soundbite for their Instagram. A lot of these senators and stuff, they want to clip something to say, I did this point. Well, she got more to clip than everyone else. And so here we are. And I don't think that anybody got any real answers. And the point of these hearings is to get questions answered. And so that's the frustrating part of this whole thing to me. But also the fact that, you know, she didn't provide the answers that she was there to give.
Yeah, so I think that's a good analysis and pretty similar to what I was going to say, which is that these hearings, since they've been televised, have become opportunities for senators and the secretary or nominee or whoever it is to build their media reel and ultimately on the congressional side to fundraise off of these questions that they ask the people sitting in
took it one level higher than
right?
me.
Well, it's true. I mean, like think about, was it Kamala Harris who made like T-shirts off of some of her Senate Judiciary Committee hearings and they always send out fundraising emails after these happen. Like, I just grilled AG Bondi. Please support my campaign.
I'm on your side.
So I think what the Trump administration has done with these hearings is basically to treat them as the media spectacle that they are and use their TV experience to out-media the members of Congress. And obviously this is not useful for the American people who might actually want answers to some of those questions, but I do think it has to go both ways, right? And these things have become so unserious that even if I were going to speak to Congress, it'd be hard for me to take it seriously because it all just turns into like a partisan clamor.
Some part of me feels like Pam Bondi's job is to assure the American public that the Justice Department will operate as apolitical as possible and distance itself from the personal wishes of President Trump. And I think a lot of that could have been cleared up. She had the opportunity to do that because, you know, a lot of the questions surrounding bureaucracy and the way that our government is run falls on the shoulders of the Justice Department to kind of give the answers that the American public is looking for. And she could have taken the time, even though it does become a spectacle, and she knew what she was walking into, to clarify or create firm stances that people did have walk away or take away, especially in these moments where the country is looking at moves that she pointed out, the National Guard going into cities, or what's happening like literally day of when Trump mentioned, or he was asked about pardoning Ghislaine Maxwell and gave his very, like you pointed out, always vague answer. I'll look into it. These things could have been cleared up by her team, especially as her being the voice of the Epstein files in the beginning with Kash Patel, very vocal about all the binders and everything that they had to show. She has the authority now to speak on some of these things, and I think she missed an opportunity to either clarify, put it to bed, or whatever the messaging was, but make sure that American public understood it.
Yeah, I've certainly had my criticisms of AG Bondi's tenure, specifically about the way that the Epstein files release or lack of release, whatever you want to call it, was handled. I do want to get into what Senator Hawley was asking her about in terms of Operation Arctic Frost and this revelation that Biden's DOJ was in fact spying on multiple members of Congress as part of their January 6th investigation. And this obviously would not be the only incidents of politicization of the Justice Department during the previous administration. There were obviously tons of attempts at putting Trump in jail, including raiding his residence down in Mar-a-Lago. And we also learned more recently about the way Crossfire Hurricane was handled in terms of the politicization of false evidence and leaks to the media, which now James Comey has been indicted for. I just wanted to get your perspective on what Senator Hawley was asking Bondi to do in terms of a further investigation of those wiretaps.
For sure. I think this is going to be a little bit of political ping pong because on the other perspective, there was a reason to look into it. There were criminal acts committed on January 6th. What led up to that? What conversations and who knew things and what dialogue were they having to say that you were completely absolved of this? And I think when the country was in an unprecedented moment like that and cleared by an apolitical judge to say, go ahead and, you can move forward with this investigation, that's something that we've taken into consideration as well.
All right, we'll continue to talk about it, of course.
The NFL's decision to have Bad Bunny perform at the halftime of the Super Bowl has drawn so much backlash from Republicans. Now, even President Trump. We'll have more after the break.
President Trump broke his silence on the decision to have Bad Bunny perform at this season's Super Bowl.
When the NFL made the announcement, many conservatives were outraged, arguing that Bad Bunny does not like Trump, is anti-ICE, and doesn't have songs in English.
The president appeared on Newsmax Monday when host Greg Kelly asked him if fans should entertain boycotting the NFL. Here's what the president had to say.
I never heard of him. I don't know who he is. I don't know why they're doing it. It's like crazy. And then they blame it on some promoter that they hired to pick up entertainment. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. And while we're at it, I'd like them to change the kickoff rule, which looks ridiculous, where the ball is kicked and the ball is floating in the air and everyone's standing there watching it. It's ridiculous. It's not any safer than the regular kickoff. I think it just looks so terrible.
Even Speaker Johnson got in on the Bad Bunny bashing, telling reporters yesterday that he thinks the artist is a bad role model for kids.
Bad Bunny went on Saturday Night Live this past weekend and responded to some of the buzz. In Spanish, he said in part, quote, "It's more than a win for myself. It's a win for all of us, our footprints and our contribution in this country. No one will ever be able to take that away or erase it." He then seemingly took a jab at those complaining about his Spanish-only song, saying, quote, "If you didn't understand what I just said, you have 4 months to learn."
Oh boy, that's certainly not going to help matters.
Also, I just want to stop and point out that President Trump said some entertainment company. First of all, it's Rock Nation, one of the biggest entertainment companies in the world, owned by Jay-Z. He picks the entertainment acts for halftime and has done a really successful job of bringing up the NFL's halftime show ratings by far because they have had multiple acts in the future that didn't satisfy the appetite of all Americans. And so it's okay if President Trump doesn't know who Bad Bunny is. Some people didn't want to see some of the other acts. That's how it goes. But Bad Bunny is a citizen, and he's from Puerto Rico, and we had non-citizens perform there. So if your biggest issue is non-citizens, we had Paul McCartney, we've had U2, I believe. So everybody with this complaints needs to just get over it. And Coldplay, thank you. And I think that when we think about what's going on here and the messaging. President Trump maybe should get to know a little bit about Bad Bunny because of his interaction when Puerto Rico had that disastrous hurricane. He went over and was throwing paper towels at everybody and condescended for his behavior over there. Or when somebody at his rally on the campaign trail said it was a floating island of garbage. Perhaps he could consider treating people from Puerto Rico a little bit better and try enjoying the music or learning a little bit of Spanish for somebody that is selling very close to Taylor Swift numbers.
I don't think anyone cares that he's from Puerto Rico, but I do think it's a little weird when you have an audience that primarily speaks English, the vast majority of people watching the Super Bowl, to have a performer who primarily entertains in Spanish. I do think that's weird, sorry. And his comments about, like, you're not going to erase us and you have 4 months to learn is just, I think, underscoring the fact that people feel uncomfortable with this. I mean, we just had an executive
Shakira speaks Spanish. She's one of the chart-topping artists. Like, why? His songs are massive.
Her Super Bowl performance wasn't primarily in Spanish.
But he has songs with Drake that I can speak English to. Like, he has songs like what? He has a song with Will Smith. Like, he has so many. Like, why can't he could bring out all these amazing American artists that we love?
Maybe he'll prove me wrong. Maybe he'll do English only songs.
Or you might be dancing like you remember when Gangnam Style came out?
Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, but I didn't know what. I still to this minute don't know what the heck he was saying. But you know what I was doing, and I'll keep saying that because it was a good song. He makes good music that translates through what you understand, like Gangnam Style did. It was a worldwide hit. He makes hits that have gone around the world and proven to be worldwide hits. So why not allow this person into our Super Bowl since we have allowed so many?
He's allowed to do whatever he wants. I don't have to like it.
I mean, to the point that the president is responding, it shouldn't rile you up that much. All right, next year maybe you'll get a good one that you love. Like, why are people so offended by this?
Again, I think it's the language issue. And I also think that the NFL, probably the reason they picked him is because they are trying to branch out globally. So this is not, they're not even trying to cater to an American-centric audience, I don't think, because they have had NFL games in Brazil, they've had NFL games in Europe, and Bad Bunny, from what I understand, I've never heard his music, is one of the top streaming artists globally on Spotify, but not as much in the US. So it's like, okay, is this another plan for them to try to capture people from outside the U.S. to join their audience?
And also that small production company owned by Jay-Z is, I think, making a big statement that as you do this stuff in California with the ICE raids.
So it is political. You admit it.
He's making a statement. Jay-Z made a statement with it. And I'm happy that he did because he has the right to do it and he runs the NFL show. And so the NFL hired him and is lined in his pockets. And so people have to just get over it and listen to Spanish music. That does it for us on Rising Live. Look out for more exclusive YouTube content coming your way. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Make sure you tune in.